The plan was never intended for my ears, but as I walked past the slightly cracked dining room door, their voices leaked out anyway. My name, the Christmas program, the laughter, a special segment, a costume gag, a line about grease stains. My family practicing it like a stage routine, each line sharper, meaner, more polished. I stopped cold, still holding the gift I had wrapped for them, the lights overhead humming warm against my face while the tile under my boots felt like ice. Hours later, Mom called me, her voice trembling, breathy, like she was trying to sound worried. "Where are you?" she asked. I didn't respond. Because by then, the real surprise wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. When I trace this back, it never begins with Christmas. It starts years earlier inside the Reed home in Plano, where everything looked spotless and beautifully arranged. Perfect photo frames, waxed floors, warm amber lighting, but none of it softened anything. I was 18 when I first told them I wanted to study automotive engineering. I remember the smell of dinner, something buttery, something rich, floating through the kitchen. Dad, Daniel Reed, who owned a chain of luxury furniture stores, was setting out silverware when I spoke. The metal serving spoon slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a sound that echoed far too loud. My mother, Marlene, the queen of charity luncheons and social appearances, blinked at me like a computer freezing mid-screen. Aaron, my elder brother, then a med school resident and the household role model, lowered his eyes with a small smirk he tried to hide. Belle, my younger sister, part-time dental hygienist and full-time online influencer, laughed outright, a quick, bright, cutting laugh. The spoon rocked on the tile and I bent to pick it up. When my fingers touched the cool metal, they left a faint trace of oil from the spark plug I'd been fixing earlier that day. No one said the words aloud, but the silence filled them in clearly enough. That isn't what our family does. After that, the rhythm settled in like a long climate shift. Marlene would slide job listings across the counter, assistant, receptionist, administrative aide, never quite meeting my eyes when she said, "This would be more appropriate." She'd gesture vaguely at my hands, as if the faint marks of grease told a story she wanted erased. Aaron would come home from rotations, pat my shoulder, Dr. Gentle, and say, "Just be careful with all that manual work, Peyton." Belle filmed aesthetic videos in the living room under bright ring lights. Whenever I walked behind her camera, she'd wrinkle her nose for her viewers. "Oil fumes again," she'd announce, and her followers would flood the comments with laughing emojis. I stayed quiet because I had learned that silence smoothed the house. Silence preserved their image. Every family gathering, every church picnic, every holiday dinner, I made myself smaller, softer, slower. I kept my voice low and made sure my boots didn't echo too loudly across the floor. Being quiet meant fewer conversations afterward about tone, posture, presentation. The memory that stays with me is small. Standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes, steam fogging around my wrists while my family laughed at a joke I wasn't invited into. I glanced down at the water sliding over the thin oil streak under my thumbnail and understood that this house had already decided who I was allowed to be. The night everything shifted, I showed up at my parents' house early. I carried a wrapped box, small, neat, picked out after a long day at the shop. The lights inside glowed warmly through the windows, the kind of glow that made the Reed home look inviting from the street, even when it wasn't. I stepped inside quietly. Marlene was deeper in the house, rehearsing her church program. Dad's voice floated down the hallway, smooth, controlled. I followed it, walking past framed pictures where Aaron always stood centered and Belle always looked perfectly lit. When I reached the dining room, I noticed the door wasn't fully shut. A thin line of golden light slid into the hallway. I wouldn't have stopped if I hadn't heard my name. "Peyton," Marlene said, trying it out like a joke. Laughter chased her words. Daniel spoke next. "She'll wear the jumpsuit, right? The blue one. It matches the theme." Aaron chuckled, soft and polite, the same laugh he used with patience. Belle chimed in, The toy car will get the biggest laugh, and the oil stain line, perfect. Paper rustled, someone rehearsing, someone adjusting timing. It took me a moment to understand. A skit. A Christmas skit. About me. About my job. About the oil they mocked but relied on whenever their cars stalled. And then Daniel delivered the punchline. We'll read the will afterward. It'll land better. The box in my hands seemed to double in weight. The wrapping paper bent under my fingers. The hallway air turned colder than the winter night outside. Inside that room, no one paused. No one sensed me in the doorway. I stepped back carefully, boots silent, the present pressed close to my chest. By the time I slipped outside, the truth sat sharp and clean. My family had planned to humiliate me in front of the entire church. The cold outside wasn't biting, just heavy, numbing. I stood on the porch with the box still in my hands. Inside, their laughter came through the walls, muffled but still bright, still rehearsed. I placed the gift on the wooden bench, smoothed the corner once with my thumb, and walked to my truck. No tears, no anger, nothing loud. I only drove. The neighborhood lights blurred as I reached the highway. My phone buzzed twice, probably reminders from Mom's event group channel, but I ignored it. The gas station off the main road was the only place open. Neon lights buzzed overhead, harsh and blue. The pavement glittered with frost. I parked in a corner and let the silence sink in. My hands rested on the steering wheel. The faint scent of motor oil drifted from the microfiber cloth in my jacket pocket, the same cloth that had followed me through years of late shifts and emergency calls. For once, I was grateful for the smell. It kept me steady. I picked up my phone and dialed Noor Patel, my closest friend and my CPA. Noor had been with me since I opened the garage at 21. She knew the patterns, she understood the quiet I carried. She answered on the second ring. "You okay?" she asked. I didn't respond. Instead, I said, "Can you open the lease folder for the LLC?" Even my own voice sounded foreign, flat, calm, controlled. She paused, clicking through files. The neon lights flickered across the wet concrete outside my window. "All right," she said. "It's open. What am I looking for?" "Just read through it." I heard scrolling, a brief stop, more scrolling. Then Noor's voice changed. "Peyton, are you sitting down?" "I'm in my truck." "You need to see this. Right now." I opened the folder on my phone. I never checked business files after hours, but tonight felt different. The document list appeared. Payments, lease agreements, notices, ownership forms. I felt my stomach tighten as I tapped the commercial property lease in Plano. Dad's flagship furniture showroom, the jewel of Daniel Reed, the building he bragged about at every holiday, every fundraiser, every chance he got. Tenant, his LLC. Landlord, my real estate LLC. Mine. Of course I knew I owned the property. I had bought it at 25, advised by Noor, but I had never tied it emotionally to my family. Not until now. I scrolled. Payment history. 3 missed payments. A pending market rate rent adjustment. Huge. A highlighted clause about non-renewal I'd marked months earlier when Noor mentioned market shifts. Back then, it was just business. Now it felt like something else rising to the surface. "They're leasing from you," Noor said. "And they're late." I leaned back, letting the neon glare wash through the windshield. For a long time, I said nothing. The pieces didn't crash together. They simply clicked into place with calm precision. "What do you want to do?" Noor asked. I stared at the lease, at the notes, at the reminders I hadn't acted on, at the unsent notices waiting in the folder. And for the first time, the answer felt simple. The answer came easier than I expected. Everything by the book. "Okay," she said already, shifting into work mode. "Then let's start." I set my phone on the dashboard mount and opened the laptop I kept in the back seat for late-night paperwork. The screen cast a pale light across the truck's interior, catching the tiny scratches on the steering wheel, the dust on my boots, the faint oil stains on my nails. Noor talked me through each step. I opened spreadsheets, checked payments, calculated overdue amounts, cross-referenced lease clauses, prepared a notice of default, prepared a notice of non-renewal, updated the market rate increase based on the latest comps, linked ownership verification documents, drafted a cover letter for courier delivery. Each step had weight, not emotional weight, but procedural, clean, controlled. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. At one point, Noor said, "If they planned a Christmas lesson for you, this is just your gift in return." I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. My fingers paused above the keyboard. "It's not a gift," I said. "It's a line." She understood. When the packet was ready, signed, time-stamped, uploaded, I sat still for a full minute. The station was nearly empty. A distant truck hummed as it passed. Somewhere behind me, a vending machine whirred to life. I pressed send to courier. The confirmation pinged softly. I closed the laptop, wiped my hands on the cloth in my pocket, and looked out at the dark highway stretching ahead. This time, I said into the quiet, "I won't fix what they've broken." Christmas Eve at the church always looked the same. Soft lights, poinsettias lining the stage, the camera crew setting up as if the Reed family were part of the program itself. My mother, Marlene, thrived here. She moved through the hall, adjusting garlands, nodding at volunteers, perfecting what she called the atmosphere of generosity. I wasn't there, but my absence didn't register at first. Inside the banquet room, the early arriving relatives were settling in. My father, Daniel, was rehearsing lines for his short speech. Aaron, the older brother, celebrated like a trophy, adjusted his tie in a mirrored pillar. Belle, always angling for the best frame, checked her phone's front camera every few minutes, smoothing her hair between takes. The courier arrived at 6:47 p.m. He slipped through the decorated hallway, past a child choir practicing carols. He carried a stack of envelopes, white, clean, official. He asked for a Marlene Reed by name. She smiled, assuming they were last-minute donations or RSVPs. When she tore open the first envelope, the expression on her face broke cleanly. First confusion, then a small, precise shock, like a bulb flickering before it burns out. The pages inside slid neatly onto the table under the bright lights. Notice of default, notice of non-renewal, revised market rent, payment ledgers, ownership records listing landlord, Peyton Reed. Her hand trembled. Paper rustled as she flipped pages too quickly. Daniel stepped closer. "What is that?" Marlene didn't answer. Aaron took one page to read. His jaw tightened. "Mom, this is the showroom lease." Belle leaned over his shoulder, eyes widening. "Wait, Peyton owns the building?" The pastor, standing at the doorway, quietly stopped giving instructions to the camera crew. Someone dimmed the stage lights. Even the murmurs from the children's choir seemed to fade. One of my aunts whispered, "Why would Peyton send this tonight?" Marlene's voice finally returned. Thin, unsteady. "No, this has to be a mistake. She wouldn't. She doesn't." But the bottom of the ownership record still read the same landlord. Not her mechanic daughter, her silent daughter, her invisible daughter, the one she tried to turn into a seasonal joke. At 7:02 p.m., Daniel tried calling me. When I didn't answer, Marlene grabbed her phone. Her earrings shook with the force of her movement. She stepped out of the banquet room, pressing the phone hard against her ear. The first call went to voicemail. The second, too. On the third, I answered. I was standing outside the cabin in Colorado snow, drifting across the porch. I could hear her breath before her voice, ragged, thin, frantic. That night, I would remember later, Mom called furious. "Where are you?" she demanded. Behind her, I could hear chairs scraping, relatives whispering, the distant edge of someone crying. She wasn't asking because she cared. She was asking because her perfect program had cracked, and she needed me to help her seal the edges before anyone else noticed. The snow collected along the railing as I watched flakes settle on my gloves. Noor was inside chopping vegetables, humming softly.
The cabin was warm, but the cold air felt cleaner. I didn't answer her question. Instead, I said slowly, evenly, "Did you enjoy my gift?" The silence on her end wasn't dramatic. It was worse. Small, stunned, collapsing inward. A silence that recognized, maybe for the first time, that I had stopped orbiting them. "Peyton," she tried again, softer now, almost pleading, but the wind shifted and her voice thinned out into the static. "I won't discuss this tonight. All communication can go through the LLC inbox." Her breath caught. "You can't!" "I already did." I let the silence sit for a moment, not as punishment but as distance, finally measured. Then I hung up. The snow kept falling. The phone stayed still in my hand. Inside the cabin, Nora was setting another log on the fire, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing pulling me back towards Plano. The morning after Christmas, the cabin was quiet in a way the Reed house had never been. No stage decorations, no curated lighting leaking through doorways, just the sound of wind threading through the pines and the soft crackle of the fireplace Nora had started before sunrise. I sat on the small porch with a mug, warming my hands. The snow had fallen heavily overnight, burying the steps in a smooth, unbroken sheet of white. My boots left the first marks when I stepped out there, each print sinking cleanly into the surface. Inside, Nora moved around the kitchen, her presence steady and unobtrusive. She didn't ask about the call or the documents or the fallout. She knew better than anyone that silence could be a kind of shelter. I checked my email only once, a message from Daniel. My father sat at the top. Short, no greetings, no scolding, just logistics about transferring operations, points of contact, payment timelines, professional, measured, the kind of email he would send a vendor or a landlord. For the first time, he was speaking to me in a role I had built for myself. I replied in the same tone, short, clearly boundaried. Then I closed the inbox. The rest of the morning passed in small movements. I swept snow from the railing, brought in firewood, tightened a loose hinge on the cabin door. It felt good to fix something where the repair didn't cost me pieces of myself. When the sun rose higher, the light shifted across the clearing, catching on the tiny crescent of oil that stained my thumbnail, still there from the night I left the house. In Plano, it had been the punchline. Out here, it was just a mark of the work I'd chosen. I stayed on the porch until the cold pressed gently at my fingertips and the air steadied in my lungs. There was no rush to return, no expectation to meet, no version of myself I had to shrink into. Just the snow, just the quiet, just the space to finally breathe. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're the quiet shape of what you refuse to carry anymore. Standing on that porch, watching the snow erase every footprint behind me, I understood something simple. Distance can be a form of respect, both given and taken. If stories like this stay with you, if they echo something you've lived or something you're still trying to leave behind, stay close to this channel. There are more truths to tell and more silences worth breaking.